The early years of Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren was born on December 5, 1782, in Kinderhook, New York. His family, of Dutch descent, lived in a modest stone house, a symbol of the immigrant community that had settled along the Hudson River. The youngest of 5 children, Martin grew up in an environment steeped in old-world traditions, where Dutch was still spoken and the local politics of New York were influenced by powerful, often wealthy families. Though his family wasn't rich, they valued education and ambition, setting the stage for Martin's future. As a boy, Van Buren's education was far from formal. The limited schooling he received was supplemented by a fierce thirst for knowledge. He devoured books, particularly those related to law and politics. By the time he was 14, Martin had already started reading Latin and Greek, preparing himself for a life in law. But it wasn't just academics that formed his character. It was also the political world around him. His father, a tavern keeper, was connected to local political figures, and the tavern became a hub for discussion, ideas about governance, rights, and the challenges of the new nation. The seeds of Van Buren's political career were planted early. The young boy was observant, learning from the conversations of local politicians who frequented his father's tavern. These men spoke of the emerging republic, of freedom, and of the challenges facing a fledgling nation. Martin, with his sharp mind and natural curiosity, absorbed every word, keen to understand how the world of law and politics intersected. At the age of 14, Van Buren's family's financial struggles pushed him to leave school and enter an apprenticeship with a lawyer in nearby Kinderhook. Though he was young, his intellect and ambition impressed his mentor. He quickly learned the art of legal practice, demonstrating a knack for understanding complex legal arguments and the way law could influence politics. He wasn't just interested in winning cases, he was fascinated by how legal frameworks shaped the lives of people and the functioning of society. But even more important than the law was the world of politics. Van Buren was drawn to the ideals of democracy, but he also saw the flaws in the system. The country's political structure was dominated by a small group of elite families, and the voice of the common people was often ignored. Van Buren was determined to change that. He viewed politics as a means of empowering the common man and ensuring that their voices were heard in the halls of power. By the time Van Buren was in his 20s, he had already formed a vision for his future: to rise in the political world, not by wealth or aristocratic birth, but by his cunning, intellect, and understanding of the system. He believed that through hard work and political savvy, he could navigate the maze of New York's political landscape. But as he looked around him, he saw a world dominated by established interests and old families. His challenge then would be to carve out a place for himself, a place where his ideals could thrive. This was his first real conflict, not just with the political elite, but with the very nature of the system he was about to enter. His journey, although just beginning, was already set in motion. The young lawyer, driven by a desire to reshape the political landscape, was about to step onto the stage of New York politics, where his ambition would meet both opportunity and resistance. The foundation for his future successes and challenges was laid in these formative years. Rising to national prominence. By the early 1820s, Martin Van Buren's political ambitions were no longer confined to the small town of Kinderhook. He had honed his skills, and his name was now being whispered among New York's political circles. The time had come for him to climb higher, to challenge the entrenched political elites that had dominated the state for decades. And he would do it not through wealth or lineage, but through an emerging force, political organization. Van Buren was not a man of grand speeches or fiery rhetoric. His genius lay in his ability to manipulate the political machinery of New York with surgical precision. He recognized early that the future of politics lay not in the hands of wealthy landowners, but in the power of a well-organized political machine. Through a series of calculated alliances, he created the Albany Regency, a group of loyal political operatives who would serve as his foundation in the state. The Regency was designed not just to win elections, but to control them, to ensure that the will of the people, particularly the working class, was felt in the halls of power. The success of the Albany Regency earned Van Buren a reputation as a man of strategy. But it also brought him into close contact with Andrew Jackson, the fiery populist hero of the South, whose rise was fueled by the same restless energy that had driven Van Buren. Jackson, a man of action and defiance, saw in Van Buren a kindred spirit, someone who understood that American politics was changing and that the future lay with the common man. Jackson made Van Buren his closest confidant, and together they built the foundation of the Democratic Party. Van Buren's skill in party building was unmatched. While Jackson stirred the hearts of the people with his bold policies, Van Buren worked tirelessly behind the scenes, managing the party's interests and ensuring its survival. He was the architect of a new, inclusive political philosophy, one that stood in stark contrast to the Federalist elites. His vision was of a democratic republic where ordinary citizens could wield political power, free from the interference of powerful, aristocratic families. He believed that through strong party organization, the common man could take their place in the American political system. In 1828, the stage was set for Jackson's presidential campaign. Van Buren, who had guided Jackson's political rise from the beginning, was instrumental in shaping the campaign strategy. Jackson's victory was a testament to the power of Van Buren's political machine. But for Van Buren, it was not just a victory for Jackson, it was the beginning of his own ascent to national prominence. Jackson's presidency was a stepping stone for Van Buren, but it also brought challenges. While Jackson was beloved by the people, his policies often alienated the establishment. Van Buren, however, thrived in the chaos, navigating the shifting tides of American politics with deftness. He was becoming known not only as a strategist but as a master of compromise, the kind of politician who could unite disparate factions under a common cause. By 1836, the time had come for Van Buren to pursue the ultimate prize, the presidency. But his rise was not without its complications. He faced fierce opposition, not just from rival factions but from those who saw him as an opportunist, a man who had built his career by playing the political game rather than by genuine principle. Yet, as the campaign wore on, Van Buren's resilience and political acumen won the day. He had successfully positioned himself as the heir to Jackson's legacy, and in doing so, had solidified his place in the nation's future. But the real test was yet to come. As Van Buren stood on the precipice of power, he knew that his ascent was not just a personal triumph, it was the start of a new battle for the soul of American democracy. The presidency and the struggle for relevance. When Martin Van Buren ascended to the presidency in 1837, he did so as the heir to Andrew Jackson's legacy. However, what was once a powerful political machine now seemed to be unraveling. Van Buren, despite his brilliance as a strategist, found himself quickly submerged in a crisis far beyond his control, the Panic of 1837. The economy, which had been strong during Jackson's tenure, collapsed in the wake of reckless speculation, bank failures, and the bursting of a real estate bubble. Van Buren's attempts to restore stability were met with fierce criticism. Many blamed him for the depression, though it was a crisis that had long been brewing. The public, once enthusiastic about the Democrats' push for common man politics, now looked to Van Buren with doubt. As the economy crumbled, so did his political standing. Van Buren's response to the panic, the independent treasury system, sought to establish a government-run financial institution to prevent private banks from manipulating the nation's money supply. It was a bold move, yet many saw it as inadequate, as the nation's economic troubles deepened. Critics charged that the system was too rigid, too disconnected from the realities of an industrializing nation. The public's anger, fueled by widespread unemployment and inflation, mounted, and Van Buren's reputation began to sour. In the face of this turmoil, Van Buren also struggled with his relationship to the Democratic Party he had built. He had been its architect, yet now he seemed disconnected from its members, particularly from the emerging faction that would soon rally around William Henry Harrison, the Whig candidate. His attempts to unite the country were overshadowed by his inability to navigate the fierce political opposition that came with the office. His presidency became a symbol of political gridlock, unable to secure meaningful reforms, yet unable to control the crises that surrounded him. The central conflict of Van Buren's presidency was not just the economic collapse but his struggle for relevance. Jackson's bombastic style, his boldness in action, had won the hearts of many. Van Buren, in contrast, was more cautious, calculating and diplomatic. He had built his career on the strength of organization and compromise, but in times of crisis, those qualities seemed less effective. While Jackson had reveled in the chaos of his presidency, Van Buren was bogged down by it. As the election of 1840 approached, Van Buren faced an uphill battle. His opponents, particularly the Whigs, seized upon the economic despair, using it to attack his leadership. They painted him as a man of the past, out of touch with the needs of the common people, unable to bring about real change. Van Buren, however, was not ready to concede. He campaigned fiercely, attempting to rally support for his vision of a stronger federal government and a stable economy. But the tide had already turned. The Whigs capitalized on the frustrations of the public, and Van Buren's efforts fell short. In November of 1840, Van Buren was defeated by William Henry Harrison. His presidency, though marked by the creation of the independent treasury, would be remembered as one of missed opportunities and unfulfilled potential. His struggle for relevance had ended in a crushing loss, but the legacy of his political